Hello, Junior 5, how are you? Hope you're all doing well. So, today we're going to complete what we started discussing in the video before. Now, we took in the intro to the narrative writing. What are the elements of a story? What do I have to do to write a good story? We said there are 5 elements for a story. Number 1, the setting. Okay, I have to introduce to my reader where does my story happen, okay, the place, when does it happen, the time, and what's the weather like when it was happening. Okay, so this is the first element of a story, which is the setting. The second element is the characters. Okay, so the characters are the people or things or animals that do the actions in my story. So they are responsible for doing the action in my story. Okay, so my story has to have characters. Now, the third element is the plot. And we said the plot is the rise and fall of action. So what's the meaning of the rise and fall of action? It means that my story has to have a beginning, okay, and then a middle, and then an end. So there has to be a sequence of beginning, middle, and end where there is something happening, there are actions happening, because we said I cannot have a story without action. It won't be a story, then it will be very boring. Okay, and then we said the fourth element of writing a story is the problem. I have to introduce some kind of problem to my reader. So, of course, they would continue reading my story. If I don't introduce any kind of problem, then it would be very, very boring. Okay, so I have to introduce a problem, usually in the middle of my story, where the characters have to face it and they have to do some kind of action so they can end it. Okay, and the fifth and last element of writing a story is the solution. Now I sorry, I introduced a problem to my readers, so I have to introduce to it some kind of solution. Okay, I cannot just let my characters face a problem and that's it. No, they have to reach some kind of ending, some kind of a solution to this problem. Okay, so these were the elements of writing a narrative story. Okay, now today we're going to learn how are we going to use these elements well into writing, and how am I going to organize my writing well so I would write a good and decent story. So let's begin. Now, the first thing that I should start with before writing anything is my title. I have to give my story a title. Okay, I cannot just start writing like this without giving my reader some kind of title. And the title has to be related to the story. I cannot, for example, write a story about a haunted house and my title would be A Day in the Garden, for example. Okay, so my title has to be related to my story. It has to give the reader some kind of idea of what my story is going to be about. Okay, so first of all, my titles should be interesting and eye-catching. What does this mean? So if I'm going to make the reader want to read my story, I have to provide him or her with a title that can grab his attention, that can make him want to read this story very much. Okay, for example, here I have 2 examples of 2 titles. The first one is My Visit to My Uncle's House. Okay, that is a very normal and actually boring title. My Visit to My Uncle's House. Okay, so if I'm a reader and I read a title like this, I would say, okay, fine, you had a visit or you visited your uncle's house. Why should I read about it? Okay? But then let's see the other title. A crazy day at my uncle's. So if I read a crazy day at my uncle's, I would be thinking, if I was the reader, wow, so I want to know what made that day crazy, what happened. So I would start reading the story. So yes, this is a very interesting title. So again, if I want, before I start, writing my story, I should give it a title. My title should be related to the story that I'm writing. It should be related to the events or what's happening in my story, and it should be interesting and eye-catching, meaning that it has to grab the reader's attention. It has to make my readers want to actually continue reading my story. Okay, so now I finished writing my title, or I gave my story a title. Let's see what am I going to do next. Now I'm going to start writing my paragraphs. Okay, so I'm going to start writing actually the story itself. But before I start writing each and every paragraph, I have to indent. What's the meaning of indent? It's to leave a space in the beginning of each paragraph. So let's imagine that this is my paragraph. So I have to leave a space and then start writing from here. Okay, and of course now we're big boys and girls, we don't draw X's, we don't draw arrows. I just leave a space like this and I begin writing from here, and then I go to the next line and write like this. Okay, so in the start of each and every paragraph, I finish a paragraph and then I have to start a new one. So I started with an indentation, or I started with leaving a space, and then I begin here. Okay, now we said we're going to start organizing our writing into the paragraphs. Yes, we said the story should be well organized. So, and I have to write at least 3 paragraphs. Okay, it's a story, so it shouldn't be less than 3 paragraphs. Fine. Now I have my first paragraph. What would my first paragraph be? It would be the introduction. So my first paragraph is the introduction. What am I going to write in the introduction? First of all, I'm going to introduce my story. Okay, so I start writing the beginning of my story. We said the story has a beginning, middle, and end. So I will start by starting the beginning of my story. And the beginning of my story, I should also introduce in it my characters. Okay, so in the beginning, in the introduction, I would start my story, and then I start introducing my characters who are going to be in the story, or who are going to do the action in the story. Okay, and then I start to describe the setting, and we said the setting is the place or time, the place and time and the weather, and of course I describe it in details. Okay, so now I want you to open your writing booklet, page 14 and page 15. Here we are. Now we said that the setting is the time, the place, and the weather. For example, here in page 14 and page 15 in your writing booklet, you will find expressions that you can use for many things, for the setting, for describing things, okay, things to make your writing better. We'll go through them one by one. So first of all, we said that I'm going to introduce in my introduction, the setting. So the setting, if I want to introduce of the time, I can, for example, say that it was daylight. Okay, so or in the daylight, for example. So daylight is the light that comes from the sun in the morning, so it's in the morning. I can say that it was twilight. So twilight is the faint light or the period of time at the end of the day after the sun has gone down. So after the sun goes down, there it keeps on being a little bit bright in the sky. Okay, so this time of the day after the sun sets, before night comes or the sky darkens completely, this is the time that we call twilight. Okay, after the sun setting immediately. Okay, and then I have dusk. I can say that it happened in dusk, or it was dusk. So dusk is the time of day when the light is almost gone, but it's not yet dark. So again, dusk is when it's just minutes before darkness comes to the sky, or darkness becomes full. Okay, so we still have some little light in the sky. We call this dusk. We can say it was dawn. So dawn is the time of the day when the light first appears. So before the sun rises, when the sky starts to lighten up, so their light starts to come into the sky, we call this dawn. It's before the sun rises in the sky. We can say it's midday, or it was midday. So midday is 12 o'clock in the middle of the day. Okay, or the period around this time. So it's in the middle of the day. You can say also it's in midnight. Okay, so in midnight is 12 o'clock in the middle of the night, or also the period around this time. Okay, so these are all expressions that I can use to set my time, to give my reader the time. Okay, so this is the first thing in the setting, which is the time. Now I want to describe my weather. How was it like? For example, if it was sunny, I can say it was a glorious day. The sun was very, very bright. Okay, very beautiful. So glorious means beautiful, impressive. Okay, we can say glittering. It was a glittering day, or the sun was glittering in the sky. Okay, it was shining brightly. So glittering means shining brightly. Okay, radiant. Radiant means very warm and very bright. Okay, so the sun was radiant that day. Okay, this is if I want to say the weather was sunny. Now if the weather was cloudy, okay, we can say it was a cloudy day, or it was a dull day. Dull here means it's not bright or shiny, so it's a cloudy day. There is no sun. Fine. If I want to say that my weather is stormy, or it was stormy, so for example, I can say there was a booming sound coming from the sky. So here I'm describing the sound of thunder. Okay, the thunder is the sound, or the deep frightening sound that you hear before the rain starts falling. Okay, I can say there were daggers of lightning. So dagger is like a short pointed knife. So when we say daggers of lightning, have you ever seen lightning in the sky? It looks like a kind of a zigzag, of like a thin knife. Okay, so we can say there were daggers of lightning shining or appearing in the sky. Okay, we can say blowy skies. So the skies were blowy that day, or the wind was very rough. Okay, so the wind was blowing hard that day. There were blowy skies. Fine. We can say turbulent. The wind were turbulent. So turbulent means either we can describe with it air or water. Turbulent winds or turbulent waves. Okay. So they are changing, it means changing direction suddenly and violently. So they are violent and sudden. You know, those strong winds that come in and just make everything in their way fly. Okay, we call them turbulent. So these are all expressions that we can use to describe as stormy weather. If my weather was rainy, okay, we can say there was a drizzle that day. So drizzle means light rain. So it wasn't raining heavily. It was just or raining or raining lightly. Okay. I can say there was a downpour. Now, downpour is the opposite of drizzle. Downpour means heavy rain that starts suddenly. Okay, so downpour means that it started suddenly to rain very heavily. Okay, now we can also say it was a soggy day. So soggy means wet and soft and unpleasant way. So it means there was a lot of mud that day, and it was very mushy. You know what's mushy? It's very soft and very wet. Okay, so it was soggy, or I became soggy, for example, or my character's clothes were soggy, so it means it rained a lot on him, so his clothes became very, very wet. Okay, drippy. Also, my clothes were drippy or dripping. Okay, so also drippy means the drops that fall, or water drops that are falling from something. Okay, and then I have dew. So it was dewy, for example. There was dew on everything. So dew are or is the very small drops of water that we find on flowers or grass in the early morning. So if you, before you go to school, if you see your car or something, you will see on it some droplets of water. Those droplets of water, they appear early in the morning, at dawn. Okay, each and every morning. So we call it dew. Now, dewy, again, if we want to describe something that is wet with dew, for example, the car was dewy, the grass was dewy, okay, the flowers were dewy, so they were wet with dew. Damp. So damp also means slightly wet. So it was, for example, my clothes became damp, they became wet. The grass was damp. When I sat down, the grass was damp, so it was slightly wet. Okay, so these are all expressions to describe a rainy day. Okay, if I want to describe a windy day, we can say the wind was blustering, so it was blowing violently. Okay, a blustering of wind. So it means the wind was very violent. It was airy, for example. There was a lot of fresh air that day. We can say it was brisk. So it means cold but fresh air. So brisk wind or brisk breeze. So it was cold but fresh. Fine. And now if I want to describe a cold weather, so we can say it was chilly. It was very chilly that day. So it's chilly means a cold that makes you uncomfortable. So it's very, very cold. So it's chilly. Also frosty. Frosty means very cold. It was frosty that day. And then we have freezing. Of course, freezing is like the highest level. It's extremely cold. It's freezing. Okay, it was freezing that day. So these are all expressions that I can use to describe the weather in my setting. So we said we can use, we said the setting is the time, the place, and the weather. We said we can use these to describe the time, my time, and we can use these expressions to describe my weather. Okay, now if I want to describe my place, so how am I going to describe a place? If I'm writing a scary story, I can, for example, say, here it was dark and gloomy So this is weather. The wind was blowing and the trees were swaying. Swaying means they were moving in the wind. Okay, the doors were slamming and the windows were shuttering. Okay, it was a spooky, creepy, weird place. So here now I'm describing a spooky, creepy, weird place. So here I'm describing my place. If I'm writing a scary story, okay, of course my scary story, in my setting I won't have a place that is comfortable or bright or amazing or fun. Of course people, if they read it, they won't be scared. So I have to write about a place that is spooky. Spooky means scary, creepy, weird. Okay, it was full of spider webs and rats. Fine. So this is if I want to describe a weird or creepy place, if I'm writing a scary story. But if I'm writing a normal story and I want to describe a nice place, for example, here the sun was shining and the sky was clear. This is my weather. The birds were beautifully chirping, the flowers were swaying in the fresh breeze. Okay, the animals were running and the children were playing. The place was it was a nice, comfortable place. It was bright. Okay, people were having fun, or people were having fun. So this is or we can use these expressions to describe a nice place if I'm writing about a nice adventure story, for example. Okay, but if I'm writing, like we said, a scary story, I would use expressions like it was dark, gloomy, the wind was blowing, it was a spooky, creepy, weird place, it was dusty, full of dust, full of spider webs and rats. For example, there were wolves howling. Okay, so these are all things to describe, or I can use to write my setting, to give my reader my setting. Okay, so remember that this is all, we're still in the introduction. So I started beginning my story, I introduced my setting, I gave my reader the time and the place and the weather. Okay, and I I introduced my characters, of course, who are going to do the action in my story, and then I started to describe like we said, the setting, okay, the place, the time, and the weather, and then I begin my story. Okay, so this is my introduction.